Thank you for the introduction. A little bit more about my role at Columbia. I came in January to oversee archives processing, and I do that. I'm also, my department is the product owner of ArchivesSpace, so it's something that we at Columbia had been talking about for a long time, but they were waiting for this particular role to be filled before they actually went ahead with the migration. So although Columbia's been thinking about this for a long time, the migration only started in March of this year, so I at least know a little bit about that, even though some of the larger historical context of some of the stuff I'm going to talk about I actually don't know about because it was before my time. So this is the proposal that I submitted when the call went out. We really wanted to have authority control. This was very important to us. When I submitted this, I thought we would be much further along by now, by August. A couple of different things came up that have slowed our progress down around this, but I think there's still a lot of the thinking that we've done. I think I'll be excited to share that. And I think there's also a lot that we can learn from the community here, from the discussions I've been hearing today. It seems like we're all facing very, very similar problems. So I'm looking forward to hearing what some folks may have done here. It was pitched as a discussion session, so although I can sit here and talk for a long time, I would love to have feedback and questions as I'm going. If I say something that doesn't make sense, that makes you recoil in horror, or that you think is really great, please raise your hand and let me know. Or if you think there's a better way to do something, please do let me know. I'd love to have this be as an open-ended discussion as possible. To that end, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. If you can just kind of raise your hand, get into the spirit of who's doing what. Has anybody here ever edited an agent record in ArchivesSpace? All right, that's pretty good. Has anybody ever merged agent records? Has anybody ever done so programmatically? So using the API, that sort of thing. Okay. Has anybody ever added an authority number to an agent record? Good, quite a few. Has anybody actually done something with that number? Compared it against an external source, anything like that? Aha, this is where we're at too. And just in case, has anybody actually implemented a full authority control program in ArchivesSpace? Close. So it looks like most of us are probably in a similar boat. Just thinking this morning, I'm just going to add a couple more questions. Is anybody exporting records to an ILS or to an OPAC? Kind of, sort of, yeah. I know it came up this morning a little bit. So I think that is part of this as well. The reason I pitched it as being library-style authority controls, because this is something that librarians and library software really has figured out pretty well. There are vendors for this sort of thing. There are entire authority control modules for our ILSs and OPACs. We in archives are often found in libraries, but we are not necessarily of libraries. And I think this is something we can learn from our colleagues, and I think it will also help them accept our ways of doing things if we're not going to break stuff by taking archival description out of library catalogs. So as I said, I would love to have this be a discussion. Many of us are doing this work. There's still plenty to do. Just a kind of off the top of my head brainstorming of stuff that I've read and heard today. It looks like folks at UNLV, Yale, Johns Hopkins, University of Minnesota, University of Denver, VMI, Swarthmore, University of Maryland are doing this sort of work. I'll be talking a little about the stuff that we are doing at Columbia. I will share the little set of scripts that I'm working on that are very much still in development. But I'm really interested to see where this all goes, and when we have this meeting next year and 2 years from now, what things are going to look like. So this came up in our particular context. We are migrating to ArchivesSpace. There's a high-level steering group consisting of a bunch of directors, assistant university librarians, and folks like that. I got placed on that group as well, fortunately, to represent the common archivist. And we decided to initially just focus on collection level records and getting those into ArchivesSpace. That meant, in our case, taking Voyager MARC records and bringing them to AS, as well as a fairly large Archivist Toolkit database, and bringing them all into ArchivesSpace. I should note here that we are hosted by Lyrasis. Lyrasis was very helpful in doing this migration. It wasn't nearly as painful as I thought it was going to be, although there's still a fair bit of work to do. We do have all of our collection level records in ArchivesSpace now. So this discussion, this steering group is made up primarily of folks working in a library, most of whom had library backgrounds. So they were very clear that we had to maintain authority control somehow for our subjects and for our agents, so that things would be searchable and facetable in our discovery portal. So everything gets pushed into a blacklight layer. It's called CLIO, Columbia Library Information Online, but also CLIO, the Muse of History. Very clever. Let's see, that is, that's hard to read from there. What this, I can tell you, what this represents is the nightly data flow that we propose. And I'll just take a moment to talk about this, because this is also something that seems to have come up quite a bit this morning. So what we do is we use the OAI feed to query ArchivesSpace to output any records that have been changed in the last 24 hours. Write them out into an XML file. Unfortunately, the OAI feed doesn't put out beautiful, perfect MARC XML. The first thing we did was we just ran it through MARCedit and gave it to the systems librarian to load into the development instance of Voyager, and she basically said, none of this is loading at all. There's a bunch of stuff that you have to do. So I ended up writing a fairly burly XSLT style sheet to do a whole bunch of cleanup and transformation on the stuff that's coming out of ArchivesSpace raw. At that point, that then gets imported into Voyager, and from Voyager it gets pushed into CLIO. As of this morning, actually, amazingly, that process is now fully automated. So now every time an archivist edits one of our collection level records in ArchivesSpace, the following morning it's available for everybody to see in our discovery layer. I'm pretty happy about that. It took a fair amount of work. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. The JIRA ticket has about 130 entries in it, and I'm really excited to write 131 tonight and say, looks like we're good. But specifically, I wanted to point this out because we are using MARC, we are using the OAI feed, and those are two things that we are going to use to try to implement library-style authority control as well. So when we were talking about this, we were sketching out a whole bunch of different things, different ways to try and actually do this. We considered having our ILS Voyager talk to ArchivesSpace, ArchivesSpace talk to Voyager, develop some sort of very complicated, heavyweight way of making the two talk to one another. But we decided against that, and I think properly so, both because it was going to be hard to do and because it invests in ILS, which, candidly is not going to be around forever. Anybody who's ever worked with Voyager will recognize it's kind of like late 90s theming. It's on its last legs, I would say. But more importantly, I think we have we were allowed to make ArchivesSpace the record of record. So this is something that came up on a slide this morning as well, where what we are asserting is the one place that we will edit and maintain our archival description is in ArchivesSpace. And this simplifies our life quite a bit. So in the past, our accessioning archivist would accession an AT, and AT was purely used for managing location information and processing status. When the processing archivist began processing, they had to manually create a Voyager record. So the archivists had to learn MARC, and we're mucking around in that. When they were done with that, we had a script that would create kind of a stub EAD record. And then that had to be opened up in Oxygen, and we would use a variety of wacky methods to get the DSC section into the EAD. So this is a pretty heavy technical overhead for a processing archivist, especially when we have a backlog of literally tens of thousands of linear feet of material. And so the beauty of having AS be the record of record is that you can do away with almost all of that technical work that, you know, processing archivists, some are suited for, some are not suited for, but either way, they should be working on arranging and describing materials because that's what we do best, not necessarily mucking around in Oxygen or even in MARC. So here's another inscrutable diagram that I will walk us through. How do we actually propose to do this? So we're going to use that same OAI feed, and we are going to take out a complete set of our bib records, cleaned up. At this point, it's about 4,200 collection-level MARC records. We are going to run that through MARC edit to get regular MARC 21, so not MARC XML. Send that to an authority vendor. Columbia University Libraries has been working with LTI. I think it stands for Library Technologies Incorporated, something like that. But they're a well-known authority vendor. They do really good work. They're also going out of business in March. They just informed us. So rather than developing all of this heavy workflow, we decided to hold off for a little bit. That's why I'm standing here today with a not quite complete workflow for this. But we have tested all of these parts. And I do think it's going to work once we decide on a new vendor. And that's something that, being part of a larger library system, we're going to let the libraries take a lead on, and then we will jump in when that new vendor is selected. But following the diagram along, we send them MARC. They do their magic authority work. They send us back a complete set of corrected bib records that we throw away because we're not going to need them. And the key here is they're going to send us a whole bunch of MARC authority records. So they're going to send us the actual, for each agent, each subject, they're going to send us back an authority record with an LC number. And once we have LC numbers, we can match them up, post them back into ArchivesSpace, and thus keep our agents and subjects up to date with the authority catalogs. Easier said than done, but conceptually, this seems to make sense to my library colleagues, and so we set about writing a bunch of little scripts to actually do this. I should note there's a wonderful community here, as we've been saying all day. In particular, Laura Woodford's API workshop, which I saw at MARAC in Newark last year. There's one line at the very end of the get.vf script that says, in theory, you should be able to rewrite this to post authority numbers back into AS. And I thought, yeah, you know, that's a really good idea. And that's, in fact, what we did. So the key thing is to get these LC identifiers into our agent records. I'm going to talk mostly about agent records because subject is, unfortunately, even more difficult, as has also been alluded today. But we're hoping that once we can figure out agents, we can use that knowledge to move forward into subjects. So the key thing is we want to attach LC identifiers to agent records that claim to be LC. Why do I say claiming? Well, we're dealing with literally decades of legacy description at this point. All sorts of things purported to come from certain sources. Some of those sources clearly don't exist. Other times, they're clearly not from that source. So there had to be, at this point, all of the data is taken with a grain of salt. Be that as it may, what we did is we took out everything that allegedly came from a controlled Library of Congress source. We exported the agent records into JSON. We called the LC API to match on strings, and essentially it would try to match on the exact string, then try to match on with a star at the end of it, or not match at all and spit that back. Then a human had to actually look at those and take a look and see, was this actually making sense? And then we went ahead and updated the agent records and wrote them back in. So on our first pass, we now have about 6,673 agent records that actually have authority IDs on them. So I'm going to walk away from the mic for a sec. Pardon me, live stream and recording. You can see here we have our authority IDs. And the actual running in of these things did not take very long. So to actually run the script to get the numbers took a couple of hours. To actually post the JSON objects back in took maybe 45 minutes. At this point, we've laid the groundwork for being able to now take these people and control them against an external authority file. It's a good start. You can still see we have about 4,400 unspecified ingest source strings. A whole bunch of those are actually going to be LC names. This is part of the issue with the mark importer, especially when it's dealing with things coming out of the 1xx fields. And there's some other issues as well. But for a first pass, I think it's not too bad. Jumping ahead. So then the way that we are going to actually do this then is we do the ASpace call to get a fresh set of all the subjects and agents. We send the bib records to the OAI vendor, to the vendor via the OAI feed. And then from the returned mark authority records, extract the CSV with the authority number, match that, and then post it back in. But I'm going to go back to here because I think this for us, this was the key step, knowing that we would be getting mark authority records back, because that gave us a point to match on. That gave us the actual LC authority ID. And then at that point, we could take whatever the vendor gave back to us, compare that against what we had, and if necessary, update that record. This will also keep us in sync with all of the other mark records that exist in our discovery layer, because we have our 4,200 archival collections, but there are literally millions of other records in that system. This will keep us in sync with those, because those mark records are undergoing the same set of authority control as well. So, and that's the script to actually write it back in, post the modified JSON files back in. For new records, we're still doing this manually. So, retrospectively, there's quite a bit of work to do. Prospectively, we are just having processing archivists, if there is not an existing agent record, to actually manually just insert that LC information. It's not like we're creating hundreds of agents on a regular basis. So I think this is something that we can manage, although I know there are plugins to actually go and get that information in an automated fashion, which would be even better. But I think the overhead here is not so high. So what's left at this point? Actually doing this, right? So LTI is going out of business. We had gotten to the point where we were playing around with the authority records that had come back from them. It was all working smoothly, and then we got the notice from them about a month ago saying we're wrapping it up. It doesn't make sense for us to stay in business anymore. And then, of course, there's the question of legacy data and legacy cleanup. There's still a lot of human review that needs to be done with this. We can do a lot with the API. We can do a lot using the various tools that have been described today, using things like OpenRefine, XSLT. I'm partial to XQuery and BaseX to kind of pull things out and fix things up. But at the end of the day, we still need human beings to actually look at quite a few of these things. And that's work that we have queued up for the fall, which I'm excited to do, although that's a lot of records. So, plenty of stuff to unpack here, I think. I'm going to stop there for a moment and see if there are any questions or comments here, and then I'd be happy to actually dig into a couple of the scripts and kind of show what they look like and how we actually ran them.
So did your name authority then become the library's authority with that name, or what if someone comes in and adjusts their nature file, say, externally? Do you get back into ArchivesSpace, or is ArchivesSpace going to be the John Doe repository for John Doe, or vice versa? Or is your ILS going to be
So So at this point, we are still going into Voyager on a regular basis. So all of our nightly exports are going into Voyager. And then, so if we have a John Doe in coming out in a 100 field, there should still be a John Doe in the Voyager authority file because that's undergoing authority control as well. The key for us is that we want them to be matching. This is right at the edge of my knowledge, but that's how I think we discussed and approached that particular issue.
Can you talk a little bit about cost? Because I know you're basically throwing away half of the product that you're getting from the vendor. Is it still a small enough amount that your library just was like, oh, drop in the bucket, we'll cover it? Or, yeah, how substantial is the cost?
Yeah, so the question was, what is the cost for the vendor's authority control? And in this case, we were talking like a few $100s a month. It wasn't as substantial compared to the massive authority control that we were doing on millions of records on a regular basis. So actually, the cost ended up being very reasonable, which I'm happy about because this is something that the vendor can do way better than we can. Going to make me pull up GitHub and show off some scripts. Yeah. Uh-huh.
What changes would you recommend the OAI to make it more user-friendly when it comes to Mark? You said you're going to allow the transformation. It seems like you wouldn't be the only one that would have.
Yeah, sure. I can actually show you. All right, so the caveat here being, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. So this is the XSLT that our MARC records go through every night. I am not formally trained in XSL, so this is something that's definitely a kludge. I'm sure there are better ways to do this, so I apologize in advance for that. So one of the first things that we found was putting out a fair number of empty fields where something was not a null value in the database. It would just put out an empty field, and Voyager was choking on those. So essentially, if the first template match is if we match on a data field that doesn't have a subfield, do nothing. Don't copy those out to the output because those mess things up. We also have empty subfields that only have one space. So again, there's a value in the database somewhere that is just coming out as one blank space. Again, that was not something that Voyager liked. So we also wanted to do away with those. We went back and forth about the 035 field, the control number field, quite a bit. We had a lot of legacy information in there, RLIN numbers that are ancient, other things like that. But we also have OCLC numbers that are relevant to us going forward. We also wanted to add a local identifier that allows us to keep to search for all of the ArchivesSpace sourced records in one place. So we've added an 035 field that says CUL ASPC and dash bib ID, essentially. So this is just doing some work that was specific to us for the 852. This is more an improvement rather than addressing a bug per se. All right, this kind of horrifying thing addresses the language issue around ArchivesSpace. So you can only assign one computer-coded language to a collection in AS. And actually, when I worked at the Center for Jewish History many years ago, we looked at AS initially, and this was a deal breaker for us because literally every single collection there had multiple languages. And we wanted to be able to encode for them. So what we've done here, and again, if, some of you might want to look away, but this goes to the 546. Tokenizes the 546 field, and if any of those languages appear in the 546 field are an ISO 639 2B language, it will actually go to this beautiful hard-coded list of ISO 639 2B and pop out the 041 code. So now if we So if we have a collection in AS that's encoded as English, but the 546 note says, this collection is in English with a small amount of French, a bit of Spanish, and a tiny bit of Tagalog, it will actually go and add 041 tags for all of those things so that when the MARC record is then imported into Voyager and into the Discovery layer, it will FAST it correctly by language. And we have enough language materials in our 4200 collections that we thought this was worth the effort of doing. This is pretty hacky. It's matching on strings. This is not high precision here, but I suspect we're getting probably 90% of our language content into a 041 field and thus into our discovery layer. Objections? Anybody? So there's also a fair amount of punctuation and text strings that come in and out that are built into the MARC exporter. One of the things is that we wanted to actually add the text string bulk in front of our 245Gs. So we popped that in. We wanted to remove the subfield E's from the 100 and 600 fields. I think those are the ones that describe them as being a creator or a photographer or something like that. And that was not something that our catalog could do anything with. So we wanted to strip those out as well. This was one that really surprised me. So initially the OAI feed went to the systems librarian and she said, oh, the MARC fields are not in order. I can't do anything with that. And I thought to myself, really? They need to be in order? But I guess they needed to be in order to import correctly. So what this little template does, it takes our leader, puts the leader where the leader is supposed to be. It populates our 001 field, which is our bib ID, which is the key critical matching field. Puts in the rest of the control fields, and then it will actually sort all of the data fields so that they come out in correct numeric order. It works. I'm not sure why that's necessary, but I was told it was, so there we are. Again, there's some cruft coming in various places. There's colons at the beginnings of the fields, there's commas at the end of some subfields, and that kind of thing. And so we started to address some of those here with, again, some kind of really super hacky string parsing. The MARC records come out pretty well. They load. We've managed to load everything in. The deltas, as I said, are now being loaded on a daily basis, which is really exciting for everybody because they can, again, just edit in one place, just edit in ArchivesSpace, and the next morning have it show up in our discovery layer. So that was a fairly lengthy answer to some of the stuff that we know of, and I'm sure there's other stuff that we don't know or that we haven't realized yet that we're going to start working on as well. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? I can just, yes, please.
So can I ask, what happens next? What about all those ones that are from local sources or you're not sure? Do you have an idea yet how you're going to move forward with this?
I do. I think the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at those in toto and basically chunk them into smaller groups and figure out how we can address them kind of group by group. Because I think a lot of them we're going to be able to say, oh, that's very similar to an existing term. We can do a little bit of string matching and then merge the agents and get rid of those in that way. Some of them probably won't exist anywhere else, and those will just have to be agents without numbers. We can funnel those to our systems folks to try and actually get an authority created for them. But there's not really one size fits all to any of this stuff. So we are just kind of taking this giant group and just chunking it up into smaller and smaller sections, so that at the end, when we do have to do the human review, instead of me and my archivists and all the folks who are going to help us doing this, we don't have to do 10,000 records. We can all do just a couple of hundred records, and do that essentially, because I don't want to task anybody with looking through 1,000 or 10,000 records.